Okay, Dr. Sarah Hill, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. We just finished our collaboration and I thought that was absolutely amazing.
It was so fun.
Yeah, so by the time this podcast comes out, that one will be out. So that presentation is a great layout of your research and birth control. And I guess my first question to you is, how did you find yourself in this position to be like the expert on birth control? Like, what compelled you to get into this field?
Well, I'm a research psychologist. I've been studying psychology and especially women's psychology since like the early 2000s. And, I published a number of papers on, the reasons that women have sex and looking at hormones and the way that all of these things affect women's motivational states. But I never really had a specific eye on hormonal birth control until I went off of it. And I had the experience that I think a lot of women have where after going off the pill within a couple of months, I just noticed that I felt different than how I felt when I was on it. And I just felt more alive and I had more energy. And I was more interested in sex again in a way that I hadn't been in a while. I was like going to the gym again in ways that I like hadn't. I was downloading new music on my, at the time it was like the iPod. I'm like downloading music on the
Retro.
iPod. And I was like old school. But what's really funny is that that wasn't actually all that long ago because I held on to that thing for a very long time.
It doesn't feel like that was that long ago, but I guess, yeah,
Yeah.
2019 feels like it was yesterday.
Yeah, no, no, for sure, for sure. And so I was just like, like that's kind of curious. Like I feel different. And so I put a pin in it and thought, there might be something to the idea that the pill changed me in these ways. And then, going off of it then changed me back into a way that I preferred to feel. And it was about 1 or 2 years after that experience that I was in a research talk by a colleague of mine looking at the impact of early life trauma on the stress response. And he had just mentioned as a throwaway line in this talk that they only analyzed the data from the men that they collected in the study because most of the women in their study were on hormonal birth control. And women who are using hormonal birth control don't have a cortisol response to stress. And then he kind of went on and on and on and was talking about, whatever they found. But my brain just was like, oh my gosh, you know, like women on the pill don't have a cortisol response to stress. Like hormones, it's like the birth control pill changes your hormones, and hormones affect everything. They affect, we know from research, they affect your motivational states, they affect who you're attracted to, they affect other hormone systems in the body, like with the cortisol response. They affect everything. And it was at that moment that I had that really embarrassing realization where I was like, oh, of course the pill changed me. It changes everything. And, how dumb that it took me this long to figure it out. Because, as somebody who's studied women's brains and even published research on the effects of women's naturally cycling ovarian hormones on motivational states and behavior, like the fact that it never occurred to me that the hormones I was taking every day were going to have some sort of meaningful impact on my life. It was just really embarrassing that it never even occurred to me. And then, when I went and looked into it, it looked like it hadn't really occurred to very many other people either. And so I went to the research literature to learn what is known and not known about the effects of hormonal birth control on women and women's brains. And that ultimately led me to the place I am now, right? Where it's like I have read and now run a number of studies in my lab looking at these effects, these like sort of little known, lesser talked about effects of hormonal birth control.
Wow, yeah, and in your book, you point out that this research is quite controversial because the birth control has been so monumental in liberating women and making them independent and they can plan their lives. I'm curious to know, like, what's been the backlash to your research?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I was in some ways I was expecting a worse fallout than what actually transpired. People sometimes will still get a little bit wound up about the idea that I am speaking critically about hormonal birth control or the pill. But usually those people are the ones who haven't like listened to me for any period of time or didn't read the book because all of the book and certainly every conversation that I have about hormonal birth control is understanding it in context. And the fact is that yes, the pill and the ability to safely and effectively regulate fertility has been incredibly important in the advancement of women. It's been pivotal in our ability to gain economic and political independence for men. And so I think that sometimes people can be really protective of the birth control pill because there's this fear, and understandably, especially in our current political climate, that if you talk critically about the birth control pill, right, that this is something that then could be used as leverage or, as some sort of evidence that women shouldn't be allowed to have access to it. Right. I hope that that's not true. What I've learned is that, people who are politically motivated to do something will use whatever evidence they can, whether or not it actually backs up the argument or not. This is just really about providing information for women so that way they are able to make really informed decisions about what it is that they want to do to their bodies. Because the fact of the matter is, we have so few options for regulating our fertility that are safe and effective. That a lot of us, for at least some portions of our lives, the pill, despite everything that we know about it, including the things that I talk about in my book, is still sometimes the best option. When I consider all of the different options that are available now, and my own life, and knowing everything that I know and knowing everything I've researched, there are still stretches in my life where I'm absolutely convinced that I still would have been on it. Right. But then I just wouldn't have been on it during these other stretches in my life where it wasn't necessary. And so I think that it's really just about providing women with the information that they need to be able to make informed decisions about, when it makes sense and when it doesn't make sense in their life, in ways that they haven't been able to do before. Because, as far as most doctors are concerned, it's just take the pill and then stay on the pill. Right. And I don't know whether or not that's the best advice for everybody.
Yeah, I can't, after learning about all the side effects, I can't imagine if I was a woman ever taking a hormonal birth control now. I mean, now that we're talking about there's male birth control talks possibility, and I'm like, hell no, nothing that tampers with my hormones. I'm curious, like, is there non-hormonal options? Like, what would you recommend as the best non-hormonal birth control route?
I mean, for women who don't mind the initial really kind of brutal side effects, the copper IUD is a nice choice, and it's a nice choice because it's non-hormonal, and it has, the same types of effectiveness rates as the birth control pill does. So it's like 98% or 99% effective. And so, effective, it's mindless, meaning that it protects you from pregnancy without having to think about it. And it's not that expensive, but it is really painful to have it put in. And some women get really bad cramps, and that can last for, almost a year, sometimes longer, where you have really bad cramps and heavy periods because your body is like, what is this thing? And, as a result, it's not necessarily pleasant during that part of your cycle. And, and I say all these terrible things, and yet it's still, in my view, it's one of the best options that's out there. There's the fertility awareness method, which, I've been able to use at this point in my life because, I've got even before my partner had a vasectomy, it was like I'm very regular and able to kind of keep on top of things. But most people, especially young women, I mean, trying to keep on top of your fertility and then, avoiding sex when your brain is like telling you to have sex, or wearing a condom when they're not always convenient, and there's not always 100% buy-in by women's partners. Can be not, it can be really tricky. And so, I mean, and then there's just condoms, right? And that's, again, their effectiveness when they're used perfectly are pretty high, but they're oftentimes not really used perfectly, and their fail rates are higher than what especially most young women would want if they're trying to, get their education and everything before starting a family. So, not a lot of really amazing options out there.
Yeah, it seems like the burden of birth control mostly falls on the woman. Why is that?
Well, women are the ones who bear the cost of pregnancy, right? And so for us, there's a lot more to lose if we end up, with conception as a side effect from sex. And because of that, men are less willing to put up with side effects than women are because they don't have as much to lose. And so what you see, when they look at these clinical trials where they're looking at, men who are being put on sort of the male equivalent of the birth control pill for women, and the men have these side effects that women have been talking about for years with their birth control pills. And the men are like, no way, like, I'm not taking this. And women are like, I wish I had that luxury. I wish I had the luxury to say no way. But for women, it's the stakes are a lot higher. And so I think that even when, you have investment in male forms of birth control, men are less motivated to use it. And it's because they're not the ones who get stuck with the onus of an unexpected pregnancy.
Hmm. Yeah, well, one issue that I've been really focused on is almost the opposite of birth control. It's the loss of fertility that's been happening, and it seems like most people are struggling to have kids now, and
Hmm.
there's millions of factors that play into that.
Hmm.
Some involve our own choice, and many involve things that are happening to us that we're not in control of, like stuff in our water or microplastics or all these things. Um, yeah, and I wanted to talk about hormones with you, and I'm curious to know, like, what is the ideal hormone profile to be for like a healthy male or healthy female? Like, what should we strive for, or what do you look for in a very healthy person?
Well, I mean, for men, you would expect that they'd have a really nice circadian rhythm to their testosterone. Generally, what we see with men is that there's a big rise in testosterone in the morning. It's highest when men wake up, and then it kind of declines over the day. For men, it also declines over the lifespan. And so I mean, those are just some of the indicators of sort of good testosterone like tone. Also responding dynamically to things in the environment, like men's testosterone will increase in response to, winning a fight or winning any sort of a challenge, or if they're put into a challenging situation, that can also raise testosterone. I'm seeing beautiful women. I'm seeing seeing weapons. These are all things that can increase testosterone, and just seeing that you have good tone, like testosterone tone, I think is one of the indicators of the fact that you have healthy hormone, function. For women, there's a reason that they call the menstrual cycle like the fifth vital sign or the sixth I don't know how many vital signs there are. And so
Yeah.
it's like that plus one. So it's like
Mm.
fifth or sixth, right? But they call it a vital sign for a reason. And it's because when our bodies are healthy, we have regular cycles for the most part. And generally, that's characterized by low levels of both of women's primary sex hormones. So estrogen and progesterone on when women get their periods, those levels should be low. Then you get this dynamic rise in estrogen levels that increase up until day 14, right around the time a woman ovulates. So you get this nice, big, sharp increase in estrogen levels, and then that levels off. And then progesterone gets released and is remains high for usually about 20 to 22 days. Progesterone levels will be relatively high before falling off a cliff. And seeing that nice sort of push and pull between women's two primary sex hormones and having a regular cycle are generally indicators that women's hormonal health is on par. It's nice. What's nice for women is that we do have this, sort of indicator, right, that we can kind of follow. And not only does it give us a insight into our hormonal health, but it also gives us insight into our overall health, because there's a lot of research now that's really diving into the fact that our hormone levels and having regular cycles are things that are related to the probability of developing chronic health problems later in life, for example, and that the two things are negatively related.
Mm. Yeah, so I guess what I'm taking away is that um, with men, it's testosterone. That's really the driving force, and you want a lot of testosterone, and it's steady and strong. And then with women, it's more of like this rhythm. It's like this dance of the progesterone and the estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And Well,
And
yeah.
just to pick on that testosterone point, I do think culturally there's this messaging out there about testosterone and like more is better, and and it should always be super high, and if it's not super high, you have low T, and to some degree that's true, right? High levels of testosterone are in fact can be a sign of male vitality and that sort of thing. But it actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense for our bodies to always have the foot, or foot on the gas pedal with testosterone. And I think that it's time that we sort of rethink the messaging around it. And so just to give you an example, we know from research that when men get into long-term relationships and when they have children, both of those are contexts in which men's testosterone levels fall, right? And this happens on purpose. And it happens because it's helping to, sort of take men's attention toward things like, competition and sex and looking at other women and, all these other things that testosterone can do. And then sort of directing energy toward caring for their partners and their children, right? And as their children get older and leave the house, men's testosterone levels usually rebound, correcting for age because it does decrease over age. And so it's like this idea that, we should always have our foot on the gas with testosterone, I think is an incorrect message. And I think that it kind of feeds into this idea that there's something wrong with you if your testosterone is lower, when sometimes that is actually happening on purpose.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a great point. And I think that like it's like the gym culture. I mean, literally, I just talked to a guy in the gym yesterday who had a shirt that said just testosterone on the front. That's it. That's all it said is testosterone. But it sends a message loud and clear that like this is the vibe that I want, and
Yeah.
it most men, young men, gravitate towards that because it's like the guy with the most testosterone is thought of as the guy that walks in the room and gets the attention and has the muscles and is the good athlete or whatever. But that's a great point. What you said is there are many situations in life that don't call for that level of aggression. That wouldn't make sense for when you have a baby or you're getting a long-term relationship. We don't need you to act like a werewolf all the time. you know?
Exactly.
So that's a great point. And then, so for women, how do they get to that ideal flow? Like if there's so many things in our modern world that knock us off balance, and I'd love to talk about those things.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that the most important things that women can do to support natural cycles are they're so basic that they're boring. So I'll just tell you what they are. I mean, it's essentially taking really good care of your physical body. And that means like eating real food, right? So avoiding processed food, like, and eating like actual like food, and getting physical activity, right? So getting some of that, getting good sleep, doing things to help set your circadian rhythm so that way you get good sleep. So going outside in the morning, right? Have your coffee outside in the morning, to get sunlight in your eyes in the morning is good for you. It's also good for vitamin D to get some, to get skin, or to get your skin in sunlight. And so sleep, good food, right? Getting some physical activity. And one of the most important ones for women is stress management. And our bodies will not ovulate if we don't think that it's a good condition for us to be having children in, right? So our bodies are super smart. And what happens is if women's immune systems are stimulated or stressed, right? Or if there's a lot of psychosocial stress. So for example, if women aren't feeling supported, or they're just feeling like they're unable to cope, right? These are contexts that tend to promote subfertility. So they tend to suppress ovulation and make women's cycles irregular. And then they're not producing sex hormones. And then they're not reaping all of the benefits from having regular cycles and having exposure to these health promoting fluctuations in sex hormones.
Yeah, it sounds so simple, right?
I
But
know,
it's
right?
somehow those simple things are so hard. Just eating right, getting sleep, keeping your stress levels low. That sounds very easy, but man, is it hard.
Yeah,
Eh,
no, it is. I mean, oftentimes it's more about like how to do that, right? Like if you are like trying to talk to people about how to manage your hormones, it's less about the information because I think most of us kind of know it. but it's more about like, how do I fit that into my life? Right? It's like, what do I do to make sure that I'm able to eat healthy meals? Or what do I do to make sure that I'm able to move my body? And then developing a plan is really, I think what a lot of people need help with, because it is hard. I mean, it's like our lives are so overscheduled, and like trying to find a way to fit all of those things in. It feels like that's a full-time job in and of itself. And then in addition to all the other demands that we have from our families and from our friends and from our jobs and everything else, it can just really feel like a lot sometimes.
Yeah, it seems like we've built this modern civilization that has so much comfort and abundance right at the tip of our fingers, but a lot of these things are interfering with men and women's ability to couple and find a compatible mate. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
what are you seeing in our modern world that is interfering with people's ability to find each other?
Oh my gosh. I mean, like what I don't know anything that's helping it, honestly. What is helping it? I guess, it's funny because even some of the things that we think are helping it aren't helping it. Like it was like dating apps, right? Like that's great, right? It's helping people get together and here's this opportunity to meet people. And while that is true, I also think that it's kind of destroying relationships, right? Because you have this context where it's really easy to find alternatives. And so this leads people to just want to kind of hang out at the dating buffet for a really long time. And this is something that's particularly troublesome to women who want to have children, like where they want to couple up and partner before they're having to worry about the fact that they might be subfertile or infertile. And so, you have this like super easy access to partners. And because men have no restrictions on their fertility, they can hang out at the mating buffet, the dating buffet until they're in their, late 40s and 50s. And meanwhile, women are like, where do the guys go? Like where are the guys? And it's because they're all at the dating buffet. And so they're having a hard time finding somebody to couple with. And I see this with these like incredibly impressive women, and like impressive in terms of like they're beautiful and they're interesting and they've got these great careers, and they're still having a difficult time coupling. And it's because the once men migrate from the dating buffet, to the sort of like what we'll call the marriage market much later than women do. And this is been like, and this has always been true to some degree, but it's been exaggeratedly true ever since we've got easy access to swipes and mates, right? And so men will hang out in the dating buffet forever. And then they're like finally like, oh, okay, I guess I'll settle down. And then there's like, four women for every man who like makes that sort of transition. And I think that it can be really difficult. I think that women in particular are having a difficult time because they're like, where are the partners? And this is, in part for the reasons that I just discussed, but also, women tend to be hypergamous, meaning that they want to partner with somebody who's at least as successful as they are themselves. And because women are now overnumbered relative to men in college classrooms, in many career fields that used to be overwhelmed by men, like medicine and law is now becoming female dominated. I mean, so it's like we have women kind of going out there and just really doing a great job in the job market, right? In part because of the birth control pill, and they're able to regulate their fertility and make plans and achieve things. But then when they're on the other side of that, they're like, where are my peer males? Right? Because men aren't really thriving in our current environment. And that's its own issue that I don't have good answers for, right? I've got the same laundry list of answers everybody's got for that. It's like video games and internet porn, right? Are kind of the two big answers for why men aren't doing very well right now. But I think there's a lot more to it. And I think that's the education system isn't really set up for boys anymore. I think it's very much set up to be tailored toward girls' natural strengths in a way that makes boys feel alienated and not, motivated to continue on with their schooling. But yeah, there's a lot of different factors that are contributing to the difficulties that people have coupling in our current environment.
Wow, you said so many things there that caught my attention. And one thing that is interesting is you pointed out that there's like this group of hyper successful males that just don't settle down. That's probably maybe 5%. And then the other
Mhm.
95% are guys that just kind of fall through the cracks and end up finding porn and video games and become like the incel, the involuntary
Mhm.
celibate. And so they're very undesirable to women. And then there's that super desirable, very small sector, but that's a really small pool. And like you're saying, I know quite a few really good looking, super successful women who are struggling to find a good man because they don't want to date down. But maybe that is the solution. Like women are just going to have to drastically lower their standards.
Yeah, like, does that sound good to you?
No.
like like I hear that, I'm like, I don't know about that. Like and I don't know how well that will last. Like I it's we women's mate preferences, and obviously there are cultural elements to it, but there's also these like deep evolutionary desires that where women are most attracted to people who are at least as successful as themselves. And you know I do think that for a woman who wants that and is then having to make the decision just in the service of like wanting to mate with somebody, right, that she's going to skew her standards down. I just don't think that would be good for attraction. I don't see how that builds lasting. I don't see how lasting attraction gets built from that.
Mm. Yeah. Well, there's an idea that all these gender roles
Mm.
are social constructs.
Yeah.
Do you think that they're just social constructs?
No, no. So let me just start by saying that that sex and gender are two different things, right? And so biological sex, as far as I'm concerned, because I was raised in the world of evolutionary biology, and the way that we define biological sex is based on the size of your sex cells or your gametes, right? And so if you have large immobile gametes, you are a biological female. Right. And if you have small, immobile or supermobile gametes, you're a male. Right. And so, and with maleness and femaleness, and there's really good reasons that we describe things this way, just in terms of the fact that this ultimately sets the stage for the minimum levels of investment necessary for reproduction. Right. And so, for example, for mammalian females who have the large immobile gametes, they often are the ones who invest more in offspring production because they are pregnant and they lactate, right? And so for human females, for example, you've got that 9-month minimum investment for reproduction, whereas for the males, in part because they have that small immobile gamete, right, their minimum investment in reproduction is very low, right? And so in these like little tiny differences, sort of cascade into and set the stage for the evolution of psychological and behavioral sex differences as well, just stemming from the different adaptive problems or the different adaptive challenges that are confronted by somebody who has a large investment they have to make in reproduction compared to somebody who has a very small investment that they have to make in reproduction. And so, biological sex is just, biological sex, right? Gender, on the other hand, is different, right? It has to do with whether or not you feel that your sort of set of traits tend to be similar to those sets of traits that tend to be expressed by those who have your same biological sex. Right. So, for example, if I, think that most of the things about myself are actually consistent with what biological females typically express, I'll feel like a female, right? And that'll be my gender. But I might not feel that way, right? I might feel like the traits I inherited aren't typical. They aren't the typical traits expressed by biological females, and so my gender might be male. Right. And so those two things are totally different, and they're both important and both completely valid. And in like I said, I think that gender is super important, but I don't think that it should take the place of sex, because I think the two things need to be kept separate. Because, for example, even if you are a trans man, right? So you are somebody who is a biological female and you identify male, you're still at a greater risk for Alzheimer's disease because of the fact that you have, you're female, right? And so we need to take account of both things. And so one shouldn't be superseding the other. So I don't know if that answered your question or
Oh,
if that's
that
what
was
you were asking.
really well explained.
Thanks.
And it made me think about the gametes, the
Mhm.
sperm and the egg,
Mhm.
and how they behave and their roles. and how that translates to our behavior on a larger scale. Like if you look at sperm, there's tons of sperm and they're all competing to get to that egg. And that
Hmm.
kind of translates to men's behavior. Men have a very large investment in what happens before pregnancy, before reproduction. And the egg is its role is to be very selective,
Hmm.
kind of like the female. And the large investment is what happens after reproduction on the female. So that's one major difference I see in the gametes that translates at large to the behavior of men and women.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's really cool about it is that this tends to be something that is seen in all sexually reproducing organisms, right? Is that these small differences in the size of our gametes ultimately then, sort of capitulate into these differences in behavior, especially when it comes to things like sex and mate choice, that you see not only in human beings, but in all species of reproducing organisms. And generally, because females are the ones that have the larger investment in reproduction, they tend to be choosy. And because males generally have lesser investment in reproduction, then they tend to be competitive and not as choosy about sex. And what's really cool is that there's only a tiny handful of these species, but there are other species. There's like I said, there's only a handful of them, but there are some species where males have the larger minimum investment. So, for example, in the pipefish seahorse, the female will lay her eggs, the male will inseminate them, and then he has to carry them around in this pouch of his, right? So here's this male with a larger minimum investment. And what happens? The males are super choosy because they're not going to be carrying around the eggs of some loser female, right? When he only has so many shots at reproduction. And the females are super competitive and aggressive. Right. And so you see these types of sex role reversals based exactly on what the minimum investments in reproduction are. Right. And the more investment that there is made, the more choosy you get. Right. And the less investment that is made, the more competition that you usually get.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm thinking of times I've seen animal like you can go to the beach here and see giant elephant seals, and
Yeah.
the males are just going to war, and it's like
Yeah.
this bloodbath, crazy. And then the winner basically gets to mate with almost every female on the beach, and all the loser males have to go sulk on another beach.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's amazing how this gamete biology translates to behaviors across all species and in humans. And we think we're so advanced, but we can't really escape our biology that's hundreds of thousands of years old.
No, it's like we can't, and then in some ways we kind of can. And the interacting between our sort of, deeply embedded, pre-programmed neural parameters that we've inherited that are, in fact, the sort of wisdom of our ancestors that tend to guide us toward these types of decisions and away from these types of decisions. On top of those, we can also have an overlay of our current environment, and it can lead to behavioral changes in really interesting ways. And just to, use the birth control pill as a really great example of this, one of the, differences that we see between men and women on average has to do with what we talked about. And that's like choosiness with respect to sexual partners, because for women, you get this large minimum investment that can result from sexual behavior. And for men, there's less of one. And, with the birth control pill, here you have something where all of a sudden, the costs of sex are a lot less for women, right? And so evolutionarily, the rule in nature is that costs beget choosiness, right? So costliness of reproduction begets choosiness. And so here is a situation where we take a pill that decreases the cost, right? So it decreases the cost of sexual activity, and women become less choosy. And so even though it's like this modern invention that, we've created, women's conscious awareness of the fact that their costs related to sexual activity are low now make them behave more similarly to men than they do to naturally cycling women. And so we've done some research in my lab where we've been looking at some of the sex differences you get in choosiness, for example, or your minimum investment requirements that you require before you're willing to consent to sexual activity. And generally you see stark differences between, men having pretty low standards of like what how much investment their partner needs to make in them before they're willing to consent to sex. And women are pretty steep, so they're over on this continuum. Women who are on the birth control pill are kind of over here, right? They're a
Wow.
little bit, right? So they still have that pre-programmed neural parameters that are sort of guiding them toward a greater amount of investment before they're willing to consent to sex. But then they also have their conscious level awareness of the fact that they don't have, they won't probably have to make that investment. And so they're almost in the middle, but they're tilted a little bit toward the male side of the equation.
Wow, that's so interesting. So you're running these tests in your lab.
Mhm.
How does that experiment work?
Oh, well, that isn't an experiment. We would actually just call that a study. And the reason is that we can't, at least not at this juncture, randomly assign the women who are participating to take the birth control pill or not. And instead, we're using people who are already using hormonal birth control or women who are already naturally cycling, and then comparing them to men, and then just asking them questions about their minimum standards in order to consent to sex, right? And then observing what the differences are. And we've done it in a way where we're able to control for a number of the sort of confounding factors, because women who use hormonal birth control are usually a little bit different than women who are not. So women who are naturally cycling, because sometimes those women who are naturally cycling are, for example, religious or wouldn't have sex anyway. And so we try to restrict it to only sexually active women who are either naturally cycling or on hormonal birth control, right? And then men. And so trying to look at the differences that way.
Yeah, it must be so hard to run these studies because there's so many factors that go into it. And
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Ultimately, if you have a big enough sample size, and you control for sort of confounding variables that you expect are going to co-vary with your predictor variables. So, for example, in this case, like whether women are on or off of hormonal birth control, um, if you have a big enough sample size and you can control for some of those factors, you can do a decent job, and you can like feel pretty good. Obviously, you can't say you have a causal relationship between things, because you can't say that when you don't have a true experiment. But you can, especially if you replicate it multiple times and control for multiple different factors, feel pretty good that the things are related. And sometimes that's as good as it's going to get in the science world.
Hmm. Well, the experiment you brought to light about how birth control affects our attraction,
Hmm.
that blew my mind. That when I saw that in your TED talk, that really kind of made me revisit my entire past. And yeah, um, and it made me think about how much birth control can affect a relationship, hormonal birth control. So like a lot of couples, they might meet and the woman is not on birth control, and they say, oh, we want to have unprotected sex, get on birth control.
Hmm.
I'm wondering, how do we see evidence of the impact of birth control on a relationship, when they get on during the relationship?
Yeah, so what you're sort of talking about is there's this body of research that finds that women who are using hormonal birth control, that it may sort of de-emphasize the extent to which they're attuned to qualities related to what you and I might call like sexiness, right? Because there's a broad literature that finds that as estrogen increases across the cycle, so too does the priority that women place on qualities related to testosterone. So, for example, we know that estrogen levels are related to women's preference for sort of masculinized male faces. We also know that as estrogen levels increase across the cycle, that's just related to sexual desire in general. So women are just more sexually motivated. They're sort of attuned to all things male, right? And there's nothing more, male than just like testosterone, right? And so having estrogen, in relatively high levels of estrogen are related to, sex and sexiness. And when you're on hormonal birth control, what happens is when you take this daily dose of synthetic hormones, is that it keeps your estrogen levels really low. And so your estrogen levels are low, and higher is the synthetic level of the synthetic progesterone, which is called the progestin. And progestins are not good for sexual desire, right? That we know from a lot of research that progesterone and progestins both are associated with lower libido and just sort of less interest in sex and less attention to some of these masculinized male traits. And so researchers then proposed, like, given that our hormones affect the degree to which we emphasize sexuality and all things sex in terms of partner choice, and that that estrogen increases attunement to testosterone cues, might it be that taking the pill then sort of lowers these things, right? So might it make you sort of a little bit less, might it make you prioritize less qualities related to sexual attraction and sexiness and these kinds of things in choosing their partners? And there's been some evidence that, lo and behold, women who are using hormonal birth control find less masculinized male faces more attractive than do naturally cycling women. And we have a paper right now that I just got an email this morning. We're getting ready to submit it, looking at the sexual behavior of women who chose their partners when they were on or off the pill. And this is a big sample of all naturally cycling women. And we're looking at their sexual behavior over the course of a couple of cycles. And what we find is that even though all of the women are off of hormonal birth control now, the ones who chose their partners when they were on it have less sex over the over the course of their
Wow.
cycle, relative to the women who chose their partners when they were naturally cycling. And this, again, is consistent with the idea that women who are on the pill may not be emphasizing some of those qualities related to sexual attraction and sexual desire because their libido is being dampened down by the pill, right? And so they're just not motivated by these kinds of things. And then when they choose a partner, they may choose a partner and have a relationship then that's less sort of typified by, having a strong sexual response. And so, anyway, which it's a really interesting paper. I'm excited for it to come out. But, so if a couple's on, like if the couple meets when they're off the pill and they go on it, because the pill can lower libido, my guess is that, essentially what you get is that for some women, you're going to get a decrease in libido, and that can cause strain within the relationship because obviously, if they have a male partner, male partners don't like it, but the women don't like it either. Because like most women, when they're having issues with their libido, feel responsible for that. And it makes them feel bad and stresses them out. And so it stresses out the male partners, it stresses out the women who are on it, and that can be something that's not very positive. But you can also get these other changes and there's been some longitudinal research looking at this. It's just absolutely fascinating, where they look at women who chose their partners when they were on the pill and then they go off of it. And what this research has found, and this has had some mixed results. So some, different researchers find different things. But I think there's a lot of good explanation for the reasons that we find different things that we can get into if we want to. But one of the most carefully done of these studies was this longitudinal study of married couples. They looked at, women who chose their partners when they were on the pill, and then, some of the women end up going off of it. And they look at what happens to women's sexual desire, sexual satisfaction, and relationship satisfaction after they go off the pill. And given that the pill decreases sexual desire and libido, the general prediction that people would make is that when you go off the pill, that all of a sudden your libido is going to improve, right? Your sexual attraction is going to improve, your sexual behavior is going to improve, and then your relationship satisfaction is going to improve. And what the researchers found was that was only true for some of the women, right? For some of the women who went off of hormonal birth control, when they went off of it, it was associated with all of those things. Their sexual desire went up, their attraction to their partner went up, their relationship satisfaction went up. And those women happened to be partnered to attractive men. For the women who were partnered to lesser attractive men, what happened was that when the women went off of the pill and all of a sudden their libido comes roaring back, all of a sudden they're not as attracted to their partner. And that makes them very unsatisfied. And this sometimes then can even lead to relationship dissolution. And so what this tells us is that, being on hormonal birth control can potentially monkey with your relationship choice priorities, right? Just meaning that all of us, when we're choosing a partner, we're having to weigh a bunch of different traits that exist out in the world and then make a decision about whether or not this is somebody who works for us or not. And when women are on hormonal birth control, especially given the extent to which it suppresses libido and some of these, like women's interest in some of these types of qualities related to, testosterone and whatever else, that it may lead women to choose partners that they wouldn't have chosen if they were their full self, right? And if they had their libido and everything else intact. And this, of course, can then lead to relationship problems. And, the thing is that these kinds of patterns are going to be incredibly idiosyncratic, right? So like if there's women listeners or men who are listeners, and, either you or your partner was on the pill when you chose your partner and you're like freaking out right now, there's a good chance that the only thing that will happen if you go off the pill is that nothing will happen, right? There's also a chance that when you go off the pill, you're going to be incredibly glad that you did because you're going to be so super attracted to your partner and your sex life is going to have a renaissance period that, many women, I've also heard from many women who this has happened to, right? And it's great, right? It's only some women who end up in this terrible situation where they find in their poor partners too, right? Who are on the sort of caught in the crosshairs of this, in terms of having been chosen, and not understanding that, their partner's preferences might change later on. This isn't going to happen all the time. And in fact, I don't even think that it probably happens the majority of the time, but it can happen some of the time, which is why I just tell women, like, be aware that this is something that can happen. Because what that means is that if you don't need to be on the pill and you're out looking for a partner, don't be on the pill. It's like, it's really that simple. And it doesn't mean though that if you were on the pill and you chose your partner, that means that you chose poorly. It's just going to increase the probability that you might end up with somebody that doesn't match your, natural hormonal state, if you go off of it, if you choose while you're still on it.
Wow, that's such a fascinating study. And it seems quite common in the modern dating field where a woman is on birth control while she's dating around because it's risky and she doesn't want that unwanted pregnancy. And then she gets married and then they decide to have kids and then she goes off the birth control. And I was thinking maybe she could all of a sudden go off the birth control and be like, who am I married to? What the hell is this? And then I wonder if we could look at divorce rates or something. I like to look at second order and third order effects. Would that be like the next step in the study is to like zoom out and look at divorce rates and then ask them if they were on birth control when they met their partner?
Yeah. So nobody. So let me say this. There's one really interesting study that looked at this question. So nobody's looked at it quite exactly the way that you said, but I'll tell you what has been looked at, and it's really interesting. And that is that the researchers looked at differences in divorce rate between women who chose their partners when they were on or off the pill. And what they found was that when women chose their partners when they were off the pill, they actually had a higher divorce rate than the women who chose their partners when they were on the pill. But when you think of the types of qualities, and there's another layer to that, which I'll explain in just a second. But when you think about the types of qualities that if women's sexual desire is just kind of turned off, right, the volume's just turned all the way down, women tend to focus more on partnering qualities, right? Because like when we're choosing partners, we're kind of choosing somebody, it's like this blend of like sexual attraction and then also good partner, right? And these are the kinds of the things that we're looking for when most of us choose long-term partners. Is like we're kind of focused on, is this person a good partner? Are they going to be a good parent if I'm having children? Are they interesting to hang out with? Emotionally stable, etc. Am I sexually attracted to them? Da 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 da. Right, and everybody kind of strikes that balance between the sexy and then the good partner related qualities. And when women are on hormonal birth control, and the volume's turned down on sex, they're just looking at these good partnering qualities. And I think that those are hard relationships to leave. I don't think that it could be a very smart thing, right, that women are choosing partners on the pill because it's causing them not to be sort of steered, making a total left turn out of sexual attraction for some person who's like a terrible partner. Because a lot of times you'll hear that happens, right? So I think that there's a little bit of something to that. But now, just to return to that finer point on this study where they were looking at, and found, and even to their surprise, because they weren't expecting this, and then they were like, well, kind of makes sense, and the ways that you and I just talked about. But they looked at, when women who chose their partners when they were on the pill, when they, wait, I'm trying to remember. They found that when women when women who chose their partners on the pill, right, even though they were less likely to get divorced than women who chose their partners while naturally cycling, when they did get divorced, they were overwhelmingly the ones to initiate it, right? And to a much greater extent than what's generally observed when you look at divorce rates across the board. Because across the board, women are more likely to initiate divorce than men, which might be something that surprises listeners. It surprised me when I first learned that. But it is usually women who initiate divorces. But the extent to which women who chose their partners when they were on the pill are the ones to initiate divorce is significantly higher than what it is for the general population.
I wonder why that is. Why women are the ones to, like, is it 80-20 or
Oh
is it
gosh, I
is it
think it's like 70
overwhelming?
30. I mean, it's
Uh,
pretty substantial. Or you're like
why do you
65.
think, is that maybe because men stand a lot more to lose through a divorce, maybe?
No, I think that it's because men, well, yeah, no, men do have more to lose, but I think that I think we might be talking about different things when we say more to lose. I think that when you say more to lose, you might mean like financially, that a man is like, I don't want to lose half my stuff. But really what it is a man doesn't want somebody to lose who does his laundry, cooks his dinner, takes care of his kids, and they don't want to lose that. And I think that a lot of times women are like, I want to lose that. Like, I don't want to do his
I don't want to
laundry.
be a human
I don't
slave.
I don't want to cook his meals. I don't want to do any of this. And I think that it's because women are even, in households that are more or less, quote unquote egalitarian, women are still overwhelmingly the ones who do shoulder most of the house related sort of activities for the most part. And so I think that it's harder for men to walk away from all of that because they recognize that they would have more to lose. And when you look at who some of the happiest people are, it's divorced women. And we look at some of who some of the most unhappy people are, it's divorced men.
Wow. I mean, that makes perfect sense because when I lived in a group of just guys,
Yeah.
we were sitting on like outdoor lawn chairs in our living room, and we had our TV on like pizza boxes.
Yeah.
And you
That's so
know,
cute.
then you move in with a girl or a woman, and you're like, wow, sheets are nice.
Yeah. It's like,
Wow, it
whoa.
smells good in here.
Yeah.
I didn't know that this was possible.
That's so
So yeah, I think yeah, men can probably live in a very undesirable situation. They just fester. They can have a mattress on the floor, and the only reason why we get dressed and clean ourselves up is probably because of women.
I don't know that I would put like give men that little credit. But I do think that, so I am in the very fortunate position of my husband and we have a household assistant, and she is absolutely amazing. Like I always tell my husband, like, I understand why people stay in bad marriages now that we have her, because having somebody who like loads the coffee pot and preps dinner, is like the best thing that's ever happened. She comes in just a couple hours a week and just will like chop things up, so that way I don't have to chop things up in addition to cook. And you know, oh my gosh. And I always tell him, I'm like, this is why people stay in bad marriages. I mean, I would put up with a lot of a really terrible relationship to maintain her. And so anyway.
That's a yeah, that's an interesting point. One thing you were talking about when we were talking about relationships and meeting people,
That
there are certain signals that um, signify to us that somebody is a healthy mate.
Mhm.
Um, Somebody has high testosterone, or somebody has good cycles and high estrogen. And I think the saying I like to say is, I think we've gotten the menu confused with the food, because I think our culture has become fixated on the signifiers that
Yeah.
represent what is healthy. Like
No.
there's
Uh-huh.
so much plastic surgery and
Yeah.
filler, and men are
Mhm.
taking testosterone and
Mhm.
putting synthol in their arms to try to signal to the world that I am this alpha male testosterone ridden
Mhm.
person.
Mhm.
And women are also doing all these things. And I feel like even something as simple as wearing deodorant greatly interferes with our ability to find the right mate. You know, if you don't like
Mhm.
your partner's natural BO,
Mhm.
that's probably a bad sign. That's a sign that you shouldn't be with that person. And
Right. You know, it's
yeah.
funny because one of the things I've heard a lot from women who have come to me after my book came out and they had the experience of feeling less attracted or unattracted to their partner had to do with scent, and that they were like, I just can't stand the way he smells. And I had no idea. And anyway, but no, as you were saying, I think that definitely societally we have tried to, and it's because everybody is able to sell a product that's going to do the thing to, allow you to attract a mate, and people want to do it because they want to attract a mate or they want to attract multiple mates, right? And then yeah, it creates this world that's full of empty cues, right? It's like you've got all the cues, but there's nothing back. It's not a cue to anything anymore. Because like we always talk about it in terms of like what you're calling the menu, we would call a cue, right? And it's essentially like some sort of a signal that's providing deeper insight into some unobservable quality, right? So, for example, full lips being an unobserved, a cue to estrogen levels, and then you have these, women going and getting, surgical procedures or injections and that are doing things to their lips that sort of mimic the cue, and then it's empty.
Yeah, and it's so incredibly common now. Almost, it seems like almost every young person is getting some sort of work done, and I think it's partially because we're now emphasizing the digital world over the real world. You know,
Yeah.
we're doing things to make our online profile look better, but
Hmm.
they're kind of ridiculous in real life.
Oh, yeah, no, I know. And especially, yeah, no, I think that's very much a fact. And I also think that it's like, it's, it gets increasingly exaggerated to try to stand out from the noise because there's so much, noise. And so you see people with, their eyelashes are out to here and their lips are out to here. And it doesn't even look, you know what I mean? It's almost like the peacock tail, we're just got, it's getting, like, is like really trying to, I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder what that says though. What's the effect of that? If you get all this work done and you have
Mm,
all these artificial cues
mm,
that you're presenting, and then you
mm,
attract a partner through those artificial cues,
mm.
what kind of relationship is that? Is that going to be a very shallow? What's that going to lead to?
Yeah, no, I don't know. And it's like I don't think that any of us have the answer to that. But I mean, clearly, we could see, for example, that the male preference for qualities related to some of the cues that men used to use as an indicator of, fertility and reproductive value. So like a woman's ability and capacity to reproduce, there may be weaker selection on maintenance of that preference because the degree to which it's actually allowing you to choose a partner who has those qualities is probably decreasing. Like I would imagine 200 years ago that the preference for full lips, for example, like that would have more often than not led men to choose a partner who had, qualities related to the ability to successfully reproduce to a much greater extent than the same cue predicts that quality in our current environment, just because so much of it can be artificial.
That's a great point. Because 200 years ago, a very voluptuous woman would be desired because it's like, oh, she has access to food and she can take care of children. And now
Right.
it's more so who can say no to all this abundance, who has the
Yeah.
ability to, you know, be selective. Oh, that's going to be a
Right.
good partner because they have a little bit of self control.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, our modern world sure is screwing a lot of things up. Yeah.
That's a fact.
Um, let's see. I have all these questions written down right here. Okay, I've heard you mention testosterone crisis in
Hmm.
another talk, and I'm curious. So, what is the testosterone crisis?
I don't know if I talked about a testosterone. I talked about a mating crisis for sure, but I mean, testosterone levels are low. They're much lower than they were in the past. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that, we have a lot of these endocrine disrupting compounds in our water and everything else. And these have generally the effect of increasing estrogen levels, they mimic the effects of estrogen in the body. And this can lead to what's known as an aromatization no, wait, can we just start that over?
Sure, or we can just change the subject.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, because like what I was going to talk about is just that people are a lot fatter than they used to be. And
Yeah.
being heavy is related to, when you have more adipose tissue, it converts testosterone into estrogen.
Mm.
And so men's levels of testosterone are decreasing in part for that reason, but in part for interesting cultural reasons, because men have to do more caregiving than they used
Mm.
to. And I also think that men's lower testosterone levels now are in part because of the changing gender roles, because we do know that as men's investing in children and their partners are increasing, that their testosterone levels decrease.
Well said. Well said. And before you have to go, I'm curious to get your views on modern academia and the college system, how it's I've heard that it's struggling and that the future is looking um, dim or dull.
I mean, yeah, academia is a weird place right now. It's like on the one hand, I think that you have all these issues with freedom of speech that are going on, where it's more difficult for people to feel comfortable speaking openly about things that people might disagree with. And that's, of course, really problematic when you're trying to raise a generation of people who are able to think and sort of parse a good argument and like think for themselves, essentially. So you've got that going on one hand, which is not good. You have the rising costs of a college education, mostly which is driven by greed in the upper echelons of the university. I work at a university, and I can tell you that it is absolutely top heavy, where there are, like 800, and I'm exaggerating here, like 800 vice provosts of whatever. And all their job is to create, work to justify their positions for people like me. So then I've got to fill out all these forms, right? And then I'm not doing research. And then they also want us to be, applying for a lot of research grants so that way they can, get the indirect costs from that. And meanwhile, are charging almost $100,000 a year for tuition. And it's like, where is this money? What are you doing with that? And so it's not an easy place to be anymore. I'll say that my job was never easy, but it used to be fun. Like I liked that I could work whatever, 60 hours a week I wanted. And do my research and not have to fear that that it was going to upset somebody, and that I also didn't have to fill out. I mean, the amount of paperwork and things that I have to fill out now are outrageous.
Mm.
And then meanwhile, it's becoming harder for, middle class families to send their students here. And that's something that I have a hard time with. And one of the reasons that I do a lot of the public outreach things that I do, including podcasts like this and the collaboration that we did for your YouTube channel, is that I think it's horrible. It's like for a regular person whose family isn't super wealthy to get an education requires that they take on so much debt. And so I really like anything that, offers free but good information to people is something that I like to support.
Are you tenured?
Oh yeah, I'm a full professor. And so like they can't if they try to fire me for being critical of
That's great.
this system, which, they might find a way to do it, but I would hope not.
Well, I've noticed a trend that I like where once a faculty member gets tenured, then they feel like they can go out and do podcasts and write a book. And there's so many big YouTube channels, which I love, like Andrew Huberman, that provide a great service to people, bringing all this scientific research that we normally wouldn't really access. Like nobody's going to go read these journals. but they communicate it in a way that, everybody can understand. But I noticed that they often wait till they have tenure before they go and blast off and do this.
Yeah, no, I think that that's an important and a really wise career move.
Yeah, because there's so much politics in universities and resentment and bitterness. Like I don't know, if you have all the success and people are in the hallways, not, hey, you talked to Jordan Peterson. What the hell? Like, that's not right. Is that the
Yeah,
vibe?
no, thankfully, I'll say I've got really great colleagues, and they might say that behind my back, but they don't they don't say it in front of it.
Okay, good. That's good. That's good. Yeah, I really appreciate universities, but I'm worried about them because they've gone sideways. Their incentives are a little messed up, and then also people are having much less kids. So the each year the incoming pool of college students is smaller and smaller.
Right. Yeah, well, and they're charging more and more. So it's I'm worried about it too, but I'm actually really excited about, some of the new things that are happening in the world of education, not in higher ed, because I think that this is an old system that ultimately I think might crumble, and especially, as traditionally defined. But like I'm excited about like there's that new school in Austin called the University of Austin, which is essentially like a free speech haven, and their whole thing is that they're gonna say things that they really want people to think about, and they're trying to promote healthy disagreement, and really kind of pushing this idea of what a university used to be, which was like like getting people to have to think about their ideas, and have them challenged and really, and debate. And so I'm really excited about schools like that. I'm also excited about, and speaking of Jordan Peterson, like he and his daughter are like starting like an academy where, they're going to have classes. I'm actually going to be teaching a class for
Oh,
them.
amazing. Great.
Yeah, I think it'll be super fun. I'm really excited about it. And but things like that where they're offering people who are credible, right? And having, good information, so good science-based information, and then being able to give it to people for, I don't even know what a subscription is, but let's say it's $300 for the year. I mean, that's great.
Yeah, I'm a member of Jordan Peterson's Academy. I've taken a few classes, and it's $500 a year, but it's an incredible value.
Yeah,
Incredible.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, like, and so like that's affordable for people.
Yeah.
Like there's and that's a lot more affordable than $100,000 to send your kids here. And you get me either way.
Yeah.
It's like-
Yeah.
and so like what a value. And so I love that there's all of these thinkers out there who are trying to challenge the system and essentially provide for people at a much, discounted rate what they'd be getting, elsewhere. And so then it's just going to be a matter of, the workplace trying to figure out what is good training. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And like, would you hire, because it's like a degree from somewhere. But, I don't know that that degrees are as meaningful as it used to be. I mean, and I've seen it argued both ways because I read a lot, and and there's been a lot of very compelling cases that in fact a college education even now is 100 a million times over worth it, and certainly I believe that it's more worth it than the alternative currently, right? At least for many people, like so for my daughter, I'm on the college admissions tour bus with her right now, because she's a senior in high school. And so I still believe that there's something valuable there. But I mean, yeah,
Yeah, I totally
it's,
agree. I went to one of Jordan Peterson's talks, and a young high school student said, "Should I go to college?" And he said, "Well, if you don't go, what are you going to do instead?
yeah,
Because if you can't think of anything better, then you should go to college. But if you're
yeah,
going to not go and just sit on the couch and eat pizza or whatever, then you should definitely go to college." Because
yeah,
yeah, a lot of people just they don't do anything good in the alternative. But
right. Yeah, exactly. If you've got an alternative plan, then, Godspeed. And I mean, honestly, there's a lot of people who do very well and they don't need a college education for that. But yeah,
yeah,
it's a
totally.
good, yeah.
I mean, as an employer who's looked at resumes, I don't really care if you went to college or not. like I've hired people that went to really good colleges and had a terrible experience with them. And now the guys that work with me now don't have college degrees and they're amazing. So I didn't care about their degree at all.
I love it.
Yeah. Anyways, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I absolutely love our collaboration.
Thank you. Me too. I'm excited to have it out in the world.
Excellent. All right. Well, this has been another great podcast. And where can people find you?
They can find me online. I'm like, oh my gosh, where can you find me? You can find me online at sarahehill.com, and that's Sarah with an H. And you can find me on all social platforms at Sarah E. Hill, PhD.
Excellent. And check out her book. This is Your Brain on Birth Control. It is excellent. Thank you so much.